Hi, I'm Alessandro Ludovico, and today I have the great pleasure to be with Vladan, Joler, and Kate Crawford, two of the most outstanding people dealing with AI nowadays. I would like Kate first, if possible, and Vladan after to introduce themselves.
Well, hello, Alessandro. It's lovely to see you. It's great to be here. I'm a professor at USC, a researcher at MSR, and ultimately somebody who's been very interested in studying the wider material economies of artificial intelligence for a very long time. I wrote a book called Atlas of AI, looking at the power, politics, and planetary costs of large-scale artificial intelligence. And for the last, coming up on a decade soon, I've been collaborating with Vladan, essentially creating these very large-scale maps, studying sort of the complex systems that lie behind artificial intelligence in all of its forms.
Thank you very much, Vladan.
Hi, really nice to see you again. My name is Vladan Joler. I'm also professor, but at University of Novi Sad in Serbia. I'm also dealing with, let's say, uncovering different forms of complexities and different hidden layers of technology, basically in the form of some kind of mapping for last, I don't know, again, many years. Basically, in the beginning, I was mostly investigating technical infrastructures, algorithms, but then more and more, when I started to work with Kate, we went on the larger scale of planetary scale systems, of AI, of extraction, and now in the last 4 years, we were like diving deep into history of technology and power in form of some kind of like crazy big maps and drawing that became now some kind of like art objects, but also some kind of educational tools, I guess. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that the first question of this interview is more or less almost obvious. Speaking of uncovering, as you said, Warden, can you explain the process of assembling visual essays, as you have defined them sometimes, like anatomy of an AI system and calculating empires? Many people around the world have seen them. So how do you start? How does it progress somehow? And when do you decide that it has the definitive form, if it has any definitive form, to be exhibited publicly?
Well, I mean, methodology, it's kind of like depends really on a part of the map. Or for example, if we speak about anatomy of an AI, in the backbone of this map in the middle, you have like 10 or 15 different methodologies of investigation. So we are basically using all the possible tools and methods that we know, because like doing this kind of investigation, it's not so easy. So for example, sometimes you need to scrape some data. Sometimes you need to open the device and look what's inside. Sometimes you need to investigate patents. Sometimes, I mean, almost every dot that you see there in the middle of anatomy, for example, it's a different types of investigation. So basically, we have like some kind of like variety of different tools and methods that we are using basically playfully in order to get some results. Especially anatomy is like really wide in the topic, so you start from some kind of geological investigation of like supply chains, of factories, of like networks, internet protocols, whatever, you know. And I really enjoy that. I really enjoy that it's not single methodology of investigation, but basically all of them at the same time. And that's basically this kind of investigative part. And then When we go into visualizing that, then we are usually building some language, because every map have its own language of symbols, of meanings, of relations between those symbols. So then we are developing our own language, and through this language we are basically telling a story. So each of those maps is some kind of story that you can read in some kind of non-linear way.
But there's since it's a lot, and you said there's also a lot of different moments to properly develop them. I mean, it's a problem of any artwork or any complex cultural objects when you assemble them. There's any moment that you think, okay, this has the form, it's ready to be published, or do you think more of it as a kind of an ongoing process? Because I've seen in different installations that you also have parts when you open it to suggestion to the public, from the public, and slightly different forms. How do you handle that? Because I mean, there's a lot of complexity uncovered there, but at the same time, it's something that is relatively easy to read, so that a person can literally dive into and go within the flows that are described there. I mean, that's of course my very humble opinion.
It's a great question. I mean, I think Calculating Empires is perhaps the first really evolving artwork that Vladan and I have created, in the sense that it is exhibited with a large book that people can annotate. So because it's a work about genealogy and 5 different centuries and the relationship of power and technology over time, we think it's really important that that has an open-ended nature, that it has the ability to continue to change, continue to evolve, and respond to feedback. And so every time it's been staged, I think we're up to, gosh, I don't know, something like 12 different exhibitions of that work so far. It's had comments and feedback from audiences that we then include in the map if they've said, oh, there's a particular technology here with an interesting story, or I disagree with this, or perhaps this year should be, this should start earlier. Like we actually really read all of those comments and respond to them. And so in that sense, the map has been shifting and changing, and every time it's in a new location, it's actually, you have echoes of its previous locations inside the work. But that said, Calculating Empires is a particularly vast, particularly complex project. I mean, this question of, do you know when it's finished? I mean, Calculating Empires is infinite. It could always be going. I mean, I think the things that really brought it to a conclusion was, physically the end of what we could take, because it was just so intellectually and emotionally completely exhausting to do something at that scale, at sort of, 24 meters, and just so much sort of precision and history. So I think to some degree for us, it's like, when is a set of intellectual questions explored sufficiently that we've opened pathways for people to participate? And I think for us, there's a sense where we feel, this is ready. But it's been really lovely to explore something that is never finished, that is continually changing.
Yeah, I love the idea of pathways, especially those which are evident and those which are not, that comes out from the interaction with the public, which is not always, it's quite rare, I have to say. It's not always the case with artworks, especially, with such a record of exhibitions. And speaking of the nature and especially the tone that is embedded in these works, Kate, you quoted Virilio, who mentions the unavoidable negativity associated with technology. In the mass media discourse, this aspect seems almost completely absent somehow for the masses, until there is a loud incident or accident. Then we start to talk about that. From time to time it happens. Why do you think we are doomed to talk only positively about technologies, even though we often personally experience this negativity, even at small scale, I would say? Do you think this is part of the balance of power that is embedded in the relationship between the big industries that are producing these technologies, or is it more sociological in nature? So how we relate to each other and how this technology are embedded and circulates in society?
Mm. Well, I think it's important to recognize that there's a trillion-dollar industry that's invested in telling us a very particular narrative around technological progress. Not only that it is always improving our lives, but that it is inevitable and that it cannot be changed, it cannot be resisted, it cannot be regulated. I think that has had a very powerful impact over the last 20 years. This type of tech utopianism has become sort of culturally embedded in a way of understanding technological systems. Now, I would say that I think we're starting to see that change just in the last few years. I think particularly with the very real political and social failures of social media, with the extraordinary levels of resource extraction and environmental impacts that have come along with generative AI, that people are now starting to ask very hard questions about these systems. Whether or not that is going to be sufficient to escape their grasp is a different, set of propositions. But of course, in Beryllioz's terms, he always described that, with every invention, you have its concomitant form of negativity. With the car, you get, the car crash. With electricity, you get electrocution. And with the ship, you get the shipwreck. And I think for Vladan and I, really critiquing those ideological positions that try to pretend that there is no shipwreck. It's all upside. It's all convenience. Our lives are only getting better. You don't have to dig very far to see, why that isn't true. But you do need to, I think, use different methodological lenses for people to see in all of the different ways how these systems are impacting our lives. So, we see that as an investigative proposition as much as a sort of a philosophical orientation.
So, I mean, do you think that this overview, this more general and extended, let's say, view on this relationship is crucial in order to properly understand them? Because, I mean, what would be spontaneous would be to address one single aspect usually when something happens, or both on a personal level or even when newspapers react on some big fault. Do you think that this specific approach is then key in order to understand the whole, which is more or less what you both are assembling in such a detailed and excellent way in the artworks?
I think this kind of zooming out uh, gives you possibility maybe to find some kind of like different relations that you will usually not get if you are deeply zoomed in into something. So we can speak about, I don't know, all the different issues that you can have within one single internet exchange point. So you zoom in and you think about, I don't know, like what this dot can do. Someone can spy on it, someone can copy, someone can like stop some packets. But then when you zoom out and when you see the whole scale, planetary scale system of it, then you understand it's not just that, it's also connected with the nature, it's also connected with labor, it's also connected with many different aspects that you cannot see when you are like in one little domain, no? But then with the zooming out, it comes another problem. It's like you need then to again to simplify relations. Like when you zoom out, there is too many things, and then basically it's where the cartography it's like interesting. It's like you need to find a way how to speak about this like complexity and relation between like Earth and I don't know, labor and privacy and whatever you can think of, but in some kind of coherent way in which people will be able to follow. Because like when you grasp that kind of complexity, you basically you need to find a way how to do some kind of storytelling. And this is why we are using maps as some kind of like navigational tools for those complexities. And I think the main problem that we have, like in order to understand power, we need to have this kind of like bird eye view, because the power operates also on that level. The power operates on a planetary scale level. So we need to also map the power on the same level, both in space, like we did with anatomy, and in time that we did with calculating amperes.
Exactly. And it makes me think of, one of the, there are several sort of, intellectual influences on our work, but certainly with calculating empires, we thought a lot about Braudel and the idea of the longue durée, that by focusing on the event, which is, when something happens, if there's like we have a disaster, or, an AI system starts intervening and misrecognizing, civilians as combatants, or we start to see, a particular company, acquire another in a way that, creates a further concentration of power. This is looking at the event. Braudel used to sort of write about this sort of the three levels: the event, the conjunction, which is a longer scale. We could think here of something about, a couple of decades, and then the longue durée, where you look over the flow of centuries. And I think for us in particular, trying to look at this broader theory of technology and power requires that zooming out. You don't see it at the level of the event. You don't see it at the level of these kind of, a new AI model comes out, or, there's a new kind of political horror story in the United States right now. You do see it when you say, how did we get to this place where planetary scale artificial intelligence is possible? And to understand that, you have to look at centuries of resource extraction, enclosure, militarization, and capitalism. That you have to see it on that scale, because you need that scale to reach where we are today. You can't simply turn that on, in a few years. So you really do start to gain a different type of political vantage point when you have that zooming out. Now, of course, there's also the problem of the God's eye view, which we critique a lot in our work. We're not trying to say, we have this, we have the one true way of seeing all things, which is why our maps are so complex, and they have different stories and different ways of actually threading together ideas and systems to avoid that. But it certainly is this zoomed out view, this longue durée, which I think is helpful in understanding this particular contemporary moment.
Then let's try to zoom in on something particularly that you also discussed, which is kind of key, I think, in what we are talking about, which is one of the most ambitious tasks, maybe, that AI in general is, attributed somehow, which is the recognition of emotions, and especially the inherent failure. And the question is this somehow the ultimate level of AI power control? And how do you think this manipulation process, again, humbly, I think that there is a real manipulation here, will be deployed in the near future?
Eight.
I think we both have views on this one. I mean, certainly in doing the research for Atlas of AI, I sort of went deep into this concept of affect detection and emotion recognition. And you can go all the way back, of course, to sort of phrenological types and the idea that, our faces reveal our souls. But that really has been systematized, not just at the level of emotion recognition, which sort of really began in the second half of the 20th century, but I think in what's going on now with the advent of AI agents that have so much information about us. We will very soon be seeing agents that have access to your email, to your maps, to your shopping, and will also know what you've been reading and who you've been speaking with. And that type of insight can give extraordinary abilities to not just emotionally, but sort of, cognitively influence an individual. So is this one of the most profound forms of power? I would have to say absolutely. I mean, that level of control is I think something we're not ready for. We're not ready for systems that appear to be talking to us and appear to be, intelligent and engaged, seem to be helping us, are designed to assist us to make our lives more convenient. And yet, of course, their objectives and their sort of value propositions are very different, which is about sort of extracting all of that data, selling to us a whole range of things, and of course, turning that into a form of political capital, which is what we've really seen over the last decade. So yes, absolutely. And I think it's also one of the forms that's the most pseudoscientific in the sense that you can truly understand someone's emotional state. But what we're seeing right now is that you don't need to. You don't need to truly understand somebody's emotional state. You can learn and infer so much from their patterns of life that is absolutely sufficient to manipulate their choices, their directions, and how they live their lives.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like. I'm now in. We are now for almost like half a year here in Serbia under some kind of like really, I don't know, regime oppression and everything, mostly towards universities, students, professors. Huge riots are happening, the huge protests, and so on, so on. But mostly, if you kind of try to understand all of those dynamics of power, for example, on this situation, you understand it's mostly information, but also psychological warfare. And what is like really scary is that like AI is becoming part of that, or will become really fast, in a sense of, I mean, it's a machine for production of information, automatization of whatever, news, whatever, but it also can be used in this kind of psychological warfare on both sides, on side of understanding our responses, but also on the side of production of, like content, custom-made content for each of us. And in that sense, I'm really, I really think this is like a scary scenario now that we are facing. It's like merging of all of those new powers that AI is bringing, together with some kind of authoritarian regimes, and how it will manipulate our information sphere and our psychological sphere as well. And so, yeah. But if you look through, if you use, for example, calculating empires, you can see like really a genesis of that, and you understand how, it's not started like last year or 5 years ago, but it's hundreds years ago. This kind of attempt to classify human emotions, to understand, but mostly to use that as a tool to control people, not to make people more happy or more whatever, but to use these powers in like psychological warfare, traditional warfare, or whatever. So yeah, same old
Well,
story, but on steroids now.
yeah. Still, a quick question for the specific situation in Serbia. Your methodology has helped you to better analyze the different power forces and how they are playing their strategies there. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you think, I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, that it's also has also some specificity compared to other places. Is it still the case, or you think that there's a more general strategy? I mean, strategy are becoming more general and planetary, as you say.
I mean, what we are seeing now, it's some kind of like a mosaic of different kinds of like strategies and events that exist within the calculating empires, but in different positions on the map and different places in history. So for example, but what we have now, it's a completely weird mix of everything happening at the same time. So we have, like, for example, students organized in some kind of anarcho-syndicalist plenum model, but also like spreading idea of some kind of new nationalism, but also merge between far left and far right. So like it looks like it looks like someone took our map and put in some kind of like machine, and now it's some kind of mold of everything happening like simultaneously. So, but I think that's reality. Like that's like the I mean, it's happening in Serbia, but it's happening also all around the world. So we are all now trying to use all the tools that we have, like cognitive, conceptual, artistic, whatever, to understand reality that became really extremely weird. So, yeah.
Okay, and yeah, there is a term that you use, digital ghettos, which I liked a lot. And the question is about it, and is confining us to digital ghettos unconsciously defines our ability to cope with the complexity of the amount of information, and it's our representation of reality, what we are talking about now. But then the question is, what role does time play in this? I mean, time is always, of course, a crucial element, but in what we are talking about seems more crucial than ever somehow, because there is the time that we have to ponder, that we have left to reflect and to deconstruct the reality around us. There is the time that is left for us to react in a proper way. I mean, your works are in your works, time is a really crucial element. They give the spectator, the reader, the opportunity to travel through time, to travel back and forth in time in order to understand the process. So how do you see time, especially in this isolation that different communities and individuals are kind of forced by different power systems?
I mean, time is heavily weaponized at the moment. We are living within our digital ghettos whereby time is becoming very, very brief, and we're being really enculturated to take an enormous amount of information very quickly. So sort of the shifting of what we might think of TikTok tempo into, very short pieces of video information, very small pieces of text that we constantly sort of absorb, I think actually creates this sort of feeling of always being in an adrenal emergency without having time to stop, reflect, assemble strength, think collectively, and make longer term systemic changes, which is, of course, what we most urgently need. I mean, part of what Vladan and I have always done with our work is move against that desire to make things simple, quick, easy to digest, dumbed down, for high-speed delivery. We almost go in the exact opposite direction, which is to create things that are complex, that are systemic in nature, that can take a really long time to read. I mean, one of the things that we've been seeing with the staging of calculating empires is that people will spend hours in these map rooms, sort of, thinking, tracing, making connections, time traveling between different centuries. And that is a radical act at this point. It's radical to take time to reflect, to make connections across history, and then to think how this might change your actions in the present. And for me, therefore, time itself is a political material right now that we need to work with.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember when I was doing this Facebook map. It was called like Facebook Algorithmic Factory. Yeah. Then I realized in a sense of like, we need years to investigate something that is basically changing on a level of second. And that's completely, and that shows some kind of power relation, because they go really fast. They have amount of power to move fast and break things. And we on the other side don't have that power of so we need time to we need to fight for a time to investigate something for a long time. And this is this kind of power relation in time that we had. And but still I think it's, I remember when basically when I was starting to do this kind of investigations, like really, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, basically the time was like super important for me when I realized that I don't care how long it will take. And it can be like 1 year, 2 years, whatever, until it's done for me, I will spend, I don't know, unlimited amount of time on something. And this is like, as Kate said, like really radical position of like not being constrained constantly by the deadlines. And I mean, the word deadline, it's like also like really have this sound of yeah,
Yeah.
deadliness. So I think, yeah, time is super important.
I love that we put deadline in the history of the term deadline on the map as well. So you can see its violent origins around the way that time itself has been policed. But I think about this a lot too in terms of what we're going through politically in the US. I mean, Vladan and I spend a lot of time talking about our sort of local political conditions and, seeing what's been happening. Not just in terms of the rapid release of AI models, we start investigating them, and then suddenly there's a new one out. Sort of 6 months later, these things take years to research to really understand. So there's that difference in tempo and cadence that's already really difficult from an investigative point of view. But we're also seeing the issues around time in terms of how quickly you can destroy things versus create them. Sort of the destruction of civic systems, of educational institutions, of universities, of research ecologies. This can be done very, very quickly. But the time that it takes to build that work up, to build research communities and to do individual research projects, that's real time. That's not something that you can just, decide that you're going to, quickly speed up or, get a large language model to try and solve for you. These actually require sort of deep time. And I think in that sense, we're seeing what happens when, time itself is used, to absolutely overwhelm and put people into a state of shock, just through kind of a speed of a type of political attack across the board. And I think it's, again, how do we reclaim time? How do we reclaim those acts of speaking to each other, thinking across time, thinking across, forms of collective action? It really is moving against the way that all of these systems are designed.
And speaking of reclaiming levels of even of production, Kate, in Adults of AI, you called for questioning the power structures that AI is currently reinforcing. For me, it was one of the key passage in the book. And from a technical perspective, these structures, you have also described quite extensively, devours natural resources in order to expand and grow because of their centralized nature and consequent remote access needed. I don't know if this question sounds silly, but do you think that there is a chance of developing a kind of a general AI kind of model that runs locally on our own computers in a very private mode, transforming the propaganda of the AI industry in something that might be effective for our own purposes? Or this is just scaling down what we have for no reason?
This is a question that I get a lot which is this idea of, is another AI possible? Is liberation going to come from creating a different type of artificial intelligence that serves a more sustainable and sort of collective set of goals, rather than this sort of highly extractive, highly profit-based model that is accruing wealth to a vanishingly small number of individuals. I think this is part of the problem. I think this is part of the sort of technological determinist trap that we live in, that we see technology always as the central actor. That, if AI is a problem, then this is bad AI, then we need good AI over here. This doesn't work for multiple reasons. The first being that the form of artificial intelligence that is currently in its ascendancy requires vast amounts of data to function. To process that data, you need vast amounts of compute. That means energy, that means water, that means minerals. That means you've immediately spun up something which, is already contributing to the climate emergency in which we live. I mean, we know already that generative AI systems are using as much energy as the nation of Japan and are on track to use as much as the nation of India by 2034. I mean, this is like bolting an entirely new industrial nation onto the electrical grid. I mean, to me, that isn't something that we can say, well, if only we could all have one on our own computers, wouldn't that be great? I mean, I think that raises a lot of problems. Of course, does that mean that there couldn't be different architectures? No, absolutely, we need different architectures. Do we need forms of systems that are encrypted, that are localized? Yes, but do they need to be AI? Not necessarily. Again, this idea that everything must be AI, I think is another type of trap that we're falling into. There are so many forms of information management, organization, and engagement that don't require these kinds of architectures. I mean, so many times people are saying, "Oh, we need an AI." I'm like, "You're actually talking about a database. You're actually talking about some really basic linear regression there." It's extraordinary to see how effective that marketing campaign has been, where you feel like if you don't have AI, you're falling behind. AI is really good for very specific things. And it is not a hammer for which everything is a nail. And we've lost that nuance. And I think, the fact that we're still giving away our political agency and our needs to having an AI system. I think that's the thing that we have to question in ourselves.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like what I'm thinking about is like, what is the difference between like algorithmic decision making, okay, through algorithms, or AI decision making through some kind of statistical spaces, and this is something that really I'm thinking a lot about it, and in a way, in societies, we kind of tend to make rules and obey some rules, and we have strategies how to create some kind of common rules, and then we have democracy, then we have, I don't know, elections every 4 years, and then according to that we are making some kind of like, I don't know, social algorithms together. If work for 70 years, then 40 years, then you will get retired and get X amount of money. But with AI, I think it's kind of different. We are going towards some kind of statistical spaces. So it's not rules anymore. It's some kind of statistical spaces. And this is what is like really worrying me. It's this kind of like new shift into statistical spaces, not rules. And that means like if you start to read all of those like different kinds of algorithms that are used to create those statistical spaces, you understand that most of them have some kind of totalitarian logic. In a way, it's like you tend to go towards populism, and all the anomalies are going to be destroyed on the way. So in a way, if we start to build societies based on this kind of statistical vision or statistical decision making, statistical production, then we are I think we are going towards some kind of like populist totalitarian statistical system or something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are two elements that emerge. One is absolutely the statistical one, which has been mentioned as the essence then of the well, most of the AI engines somehow, which doesn't emerge instead. It's not at all really understood, but I would say that the consequence of the statistical is then the predictive attitude, because the prediction is based on the statistical work that is behind it. And so
but prediction, it's also power of many against the quality of anomalies. And if you think like, prediction will always go in towards the populist totalitarian thing, not the asset of differences that we all have. And most beautiful things, it's like what are those anomalies within us and us as anomalies, no?
Absolutely, and that's why the prediction element, I mean, sounds somehow even more dangerous. I was reading just yesterday of a person who is making a parallel between the classic ritual of summoning and the ritual that many people have now to ask any predictive, statistical, or AI system, as we want to call it, in order to get results. So how we act very similarly in both of them. So, but then, do you think that the algorithm or prediction is part of or closely related to what we call the distraction aspect of AI?
I mean, I think there's a really important set of distinctions that we need to make here. I mean, certainly when I think about the sort of classic Hart and Negri formulation of information capitalism as being sort of driven by these sort of dual functions of extraction and abstraction, extracting as many resources as possible, abstracting away their impacts and effects. To me, an argument that I've made in my work before is that we need to sort of to expand this algorithm to include distraction. So because the distraction is part of what allows you to continue with the abstraction and the extraction. And we have an enormous set of systems that are constantly primed and optimized to distract us. But this goes beyond a set of sort of predictive functions. And I think we've really shifted away from what was thought more as the sort of the predictive era of artificial intelligence into the generative. And I think the sort of generative algorithms structurally are very different to predictive algorithms. You're not trying and guess if somebody is going to be a criminal threat. You're trying to generate an image of what a criminal looks like. So it's immediately standardizing, normalizing, drawing on data sets to create a particular type of image or a particular type of text that is statistically common, not necessarily accurate, not necessarily true, not necessarily, even something that the system understands. There's no sort of understanding model behind it. It's purely statistical frequency, like how often do these things appear next to each other? And that in some ways is actually quite a radical shift away from prediction in terms of coming up with a predictive response. And I think here we get somewhere that's really interesting. And it's certainly in the work that we've done in Knowing Machines, we've been studying very closely, not just generative AI algorithms, but the training sets that they're based on, things like Lion 5B. And people understand that effectively we're training AI on the entirety of the internet. And we assume that that's somehow comprehensive and evenly spread. But in fact, this is not true at all. And in work that has been done by the likes of Jeff Thorpe and Christo Buschek, it's really been focusing on how these data sets are skewed. They pull much more from, for example, standardized photo image sites like Getty Images, and secondarily from shopping sites like Shopify and Pinterest. And that means these are literally engines of seeing with corporate logics. That's what you're doing. You're putting on the glasses of a shopping cart and saying, this is how I'm going to see the world. So this type of aesthetics, as well as sort of intervention into what the world will look like and sound like, I think is actually really profound. It's much more than predicting. It's saying this is how the world is, and to me that is an intervention the likes of which is much more systemic, and really demarcates a significant shift. So I think that's the period that we're going into, away from a kind of predictive logic into a generative one.
Mm.
I see the thumbs up from Vladan. Yeah, that was really great. Scaring at the same time, but really great. Okay, I have a last question. We have 4 minutes left. Vladan, you have referred to your maps as counter cartography, but define them as ultimately an illusion, as possibly every map is. Can you elaborate on what kind of illusion this is, and how it can or cannot be used methodologically?
Okay, so basically idea of counter cartography, it's like I'm not coming from the position of power. So usually the maps are like, this is my kingdom, this is my empire, this is my company, and this is how the organizational structure will work. So we are coming from another side, looking into the black box and trying to understand what's that. So it's not from the position, this is I'm trying to understand your forms of power, no? And then so and because it's coming from outside of the black box and we don't own this black box, basically it will always be kind of not precise. And I spoke a bit before about this kind of relation of time, in which like we need months and years to study something that lasts for one part of the second, no? That is changing every 1 second. So it's always so illusion is that we can do it, that's the main illusion. It's kind of like algorithmic transparency. We can do it. No, we cannot do it from the outside. It's almost not possible. And everything we do, it's not going to be like completely precise. But it is really important to try to do it. So this is like why I'm thinking it's like illusion. It's like illusion of like, we also give this kind of like a sense of, because those maps are big, black. And so we are kind of taking this kind of visual language of cartography and military power. So they look kind of like, oh my God, this is the ultimate truth. But basically, when you are doing the map, you always know it is some kind of fiction, because you create your own language, you are making decisions, every dot is a decision. So in a way, we know that it's basically a narrative, we know it's a story, we know it's biased, we know everything, but we think it's like really important to do it. It's really important to try to map those complexities, even we know that it's kind of not possible. So this is why I think it's kind of illusion, but really needed illusion. It is really
I think you're so right. And I think in some ways it's like sort of philosophy at the limit. It's,
Yeah.
in the act of producing theoretical understandings of the world, that these are going to be tested over time, and one of the things that you also know is that you cannot see into every system. You can attempt to, you can certainly do a lot of investigation, but you're going to hit real limitations. And so then you need to sort of move laterally. What can we see? What can be understood? And I think part of what I've found really useful is that it's not just a question of studying data sets, looking at patterns, studying the supply chain. It's about physically going to places. It's about going into mines, going inside Amazon fulfillment warehouses. It's going and talking to people who are creating data sets. It's seeing these political relations as they're evolving over time. And I think in that sense, it's almost like a way of fact-checking ourselves. It's saying, well, this is as much as we can know. Let's see what's actually happening on the ground. So that combination, I think, of the fieldwork element with the kind of more philosophical, theoretical work that Vladan and I do means that, we know there's always going to be a limit. There's a hard limit, but how much can we show? How many things can we connect? And I think for us, the test is always, is this still helping us? And I think looking at what's been happening with Elon Musk and the Trump administration, we really focused on Musk's industries at sort of the top of the calculating empires map. And I look at that sort of merging of public and private, sort of the administrative functions of the state with the kind of sort of corporate structures of things like Starlink. And we're living it now. We're living this set of sort of theoretical propositions that we designed, 5 years ago now. And so I think in some ways, the illusion is that you can ever see everything and know everything. Of course you can't. But I think as Vladan says rightly, it's the work that's needed is to put yourself at that limit, to understand what can be seen, what can be understood, to go to those locations, and then to try and share those stories as part of not just an artistic process, but a pedagogical one and a political one.
I would continue to talk to you until tomorrow morning if I could. It's so interesting that I can't even say or quantify it all. But thank you. Thank you so much for your time. It has been really a pleasure to talk to both of you. Thank you very much.
It's so lovely to see you. Thanks for your time.